David's life had always seemed picture perfect. A devoted husband, a loving father, and a man who found solace in the simple things. He had a steady job as a financial advisor, a well-kept home, and a beautiful family. His wife, Rachel, was everything he had ever wanted. Together, they had been married for 10 years, and in his eyes, their life was one of mutual respect, love, and shared dreams. It was a Sunday morning when the unease first crept in. David had woken up early, as he often did, enjoying the quiet moments before the house stirred to life. As he walked to the kitchen, he noticed Rachel's phone on the counter, face up. The screen was dimly lit, showing a recent text message. Something about it struck him, an unfamiliar name, a casual tone. He tried to brush it off, telling himself it was just a work contact or a message from one of her friends. But the nagging feeling didn't go away. For the next few days, he found himself noticing small things. Rachel's phone had become an extension of her hand, rarely leaving her grasp, even when she wasn't using it. Her usual affectionate demeanor had grown distant, and she started staying late at work more often. When she was home, she seemed distracted, lost in her thoughts, and less present than before. David tried to dismiss his suspicions, chalking it up to stress or routine. But deep down, something told him that the distance between them wasn't just in her mind. It was real. One evening, while Rachel was out with friends, David couldn't help but feel the urge to look deeper. He wandered around the house, his mind racing. It wasn't like him to snoop, but there was something about Rachel's sudden coldness that made him question everything he thought he knew. He checked the usual places, her desk, the kitchen drawer, her purse. Nothing. But then his eyes landed on the attic door. The attic had always been a space they rarely visited. It was cluttered with old furniture, forgotten boxes, and a few holiday decorations that had collected dust over the years. David had never paid much attention to it, but that night, something about it felt different. As he walked over and touched the handle, a strange unease washed over him. The air was heavy, thick with the weight of his thoughts. He hesitated but pushed it open, stepping up into the dark, musty space, unaware that his life was about to change forever. What he found that night would shatter everything he believed about his wife and about himself. The truth, hidden in the shadows of their home, would set in motion a series of events that no one could have predicted. And as David stood in the attic, staring at the startling scene before him, one thing became painfully clear. Nothing would ever be the same again. The subtle signs of Rachel's growing distance didn't escape David's notice. At first, they were just small moments, easily explained away by the busyness of everyday life. But soon, they became more frequent, and each one left a gnawing feeling in his stomach that he could no longer ignore. It had all started with the phone, Rachel's phone. It was a silly thing, really, just a single text message that had made David pause for a moment longer than he should have. The message was innocuous enough. "You coming by later?" From a number he didn't recognize. The tone was casual, almost flirtatious, but it wasn't the message itself that stuck with him. It was the urgency with which Rachel grabbed her phone when she heard him coming down the stairs. David had dismissed it at the time. It could have been a harmless conversation, right? Maybe a colleague, or a friend she hadn't mentioned recently. It wasn't as though Rachel had been acting strangely, not at first. She was still warm and loving, still the woman he had married. But there was something in the way she would quickly tuck her phone away whenever he walked into a room. And those late nights at work, they started becoming a regular routine. One night, after putting their kids to bed, David sat on the couch, absent-mindedly flipping through the channels. Rachel was in the kitchen, seemingly lost in her thoughts as she prepared dinner. The hum of the refrigerator and the clink of utensils were the only sounds breaking the silence. He watched her for a moment, and his mind wandered back to that text message, the one he couldn't forget. Was it possible that something was going on? Was he imagining things? Everything okay? David asked, his voice breaking through quiet. Rachel glanced up, offering a tight smile. "Yeah, just tired," she replied, her voice lacking its usual warmth. She quickly returned to chopping vegetables, clearly not meeting his gaze. That was the first moment David felt a sting of doubt. The absence of affection in her voice, the way she avoided his eyes, it all felt wrong. As the days passed, Those small doubts turned into larger concerns. Rachel became more and more distant, always preoccupied with something else, as if her mind were somewhere far from their home. She stopped sharing the little details of her day like she used to. Their conversations, once filled with laughter and banter, were now curt, functional. She was still physically present, but emotionally, she seemed miles away. David found himself waking up earlier than usual, unable to sleep, a strange sense of unease settling in his chest. He began paying more attention to her behavior, watching how she interacted with him and others. During family outings, she seemed distracted, checking her phone at odd intervals or excusing herself to take long phone calls in private. He noticed she was more interested in socializing with friends than spending quiet time at home with him. When they were together, there was always an invisible barrier between them, an unspoken distance that made David feel like an outsider in his own marriage. The turning point came one Friday evening, when David decided to follow her after she told him she was meeting some friends for drinks. It was an impulsive decision, but something in him told him that he needed to know. He knew Rachel's routine. She would often meet with her closest friends at a cafe downtown, a place she'd been going to for years. But that evening, he decided to take a different route and follow her from a distance. He trailed her car down familiar streets, his heart pounding as the unease in his gut grew. The car made several unexpected turns, leading David into unfamiliar parts of the city. His mind raced. Was she meeting someone? Was she hiding something? Finally, she parked in front of a small building, one he didn't recognize. He parked a block away, watching from a distance as she entered the building without looking back. David waited in the car for nearly an hour. His mind ran through 1,000 possibilities, each one worse than the last. What if she was meeting someone she shouldn't be? What if she was having an affair? The thought sent a rush of panic through him. Was his life really a lie? Was everything they had built together built on a foundation of secrets? When Rachel finally emerged, she was alone. She walked back to her car without a second glance, her steps quick and purposeful. David followed her home in a haze, his mind still reeling from the uncertainty. What had she been doing in that building? Who had she been meeting? The next morning, David tried to shake off the gnawing feeling of suspicion. He wanted to believe that there was a logical explanation for everything. But the cracks in his trust were widening, and he knew deep down that something wasn't right. His suspicions only deepened when he started to notice other strange behaviors. Rachel's routine at home had shifted. She was spending more time in the bathroom, sometimes for hours, and often texting or talking on the phone in private. David tried to ask her about it, but each time she dismissed his concerns with a strained smile and a casual response. She would say, "You're just imagining things, David. You're being paranoid." But the truth was, the more he tried to shake it off, the more certain he became. He wasn't imagining things. Rachel's behavior had changed, and it wasn't just a phase. It was a slow but deliberate shift, one that made David feel like a stranger in his own home. One evening, while Rachel was in the shower, David decided to check her phone again. His hands trembled slightly as he picked it up, the guilt of invading her privacy weighing on him. But at this point, he felt he had no choice. As he opened her text messages, his heart skipped a beat. There, buried among mundane conversations, was another message from the same number. This time, the message read, "Can't wait to see you tonight. The attic's ready for us." The words hit him like a punch to the gut. His mind raced. The attic? What's going on? Who was she seeing? And why had Rachel been so careful with her phone? The question echoed in his mind like a drumbeat, louder and louder, until it felt like the only thing that mattered. The answer, it seemed, was hidden above him, in the attic. David could feel the weight of the text message pressing down on him. The attic's ready for us. His thoughts spiraled as he stared at the phone screen, the words flickering before his eyes. What attic? And who was she meeting up there? The more he thought about it, the more irrational the idea seemed. Why would Rachel have an affair with someone in their home? But then, the more he thought about it, the more it made sense. David knew that the attic was an often forgotten part of the house. It was one of those spaces that everyone used to store things, but rarely ever visited. It was cluttered with boxes, old furniture, and forgotten holiday decorations. If someone wanted to keep something secret, the attic would be the perfect place. No one would think to check there. His heart pounded as he put the phone down, the words still echoing in his mind. He couldn't shake the thought of Rachel's lover hiding in the attic, of everything coming to a head in that dark, forgotten space above them. He had to know for sure. David quietly stood up, his legs trembling. He knew Rachel was in the shower, and it was the perfect opportunity to investigate without her noticing. His mind raced. Was he ready to uncover the truth, whatever it might be? But even as the question hung in the air, David found himself walking toward the attic door. Each step felt heavier than the last, the sense of dread mounting with every inch he took. He reached the door at the top of the stairs, staring at the small wooden handle. The attic had always been off-limits, for the most part. A few years ago, when they'd moved in, David and Rachel had promised each other they would keep the attic tidy and use it for storage. But in reality, it had become little more than a forgotten corner of the house. He didn't even know what was up there anymore. Boxes of old clothes, childhood memorabilia, and a couple of unused appliances. But now that space, so insignificant just a few weeks ago, had become the focal point of all his doubts. David gripped the handle and hesitated. The air around him felt thick, suffocating. He could almost hear the hum of the house, the creaking floorboards above him. He wondered if Rachel had ever been up there in recent weeks. If she had, was she hiding something? Was Ethan, her lover, there right now? His heart beat faster as the thought took root. He pushed the door open and stepped into the dimly lit hallway. The attic door, which had once been easy to ignore, now seemed like a dark portal into the heart of a secret world. He hadn't realized how unsettling the attic stairs could be until now. The creak of each step as he ascended was deafening, each one making his chest tighten. The small window at the top of the stairs let in only a sliver of light, casting long, jagged shadows on the dusty floorboards. The attic smelled musty, old, like forgotten time itself. There were piles of boxes everywhere, some stacked neatly, others haphazardly tossed around. It looked exactly like he remembered. Yet, everything felt different. The space that had once been insignificant now held a dark weight. David's eyes scanned the room, searching for anything out of place. He walked through the cluttered attic, his heart racing. His mind kept circling back to that message, the part that had stood out the most. The attic's ready for us? Who had said that? Was Rachel seeing someone else? Was this the moment where everything would come crashing down? As he moved deeper into the attic, David's gaze fell on a pile of old moving boxes in the far corner. There was something odd about them. A large piece of furniture had been moved, creating a small gap behind it. David's curiosity grew, and he made his way toward it, brushing aside dust and cobwebs as he knelt down. And then he saw it. A door. He hadn't noticed it before, hidden behind the piles of old boxes. It was small, narrow, almost invisible unless you were specifically looking for it. His pulse quickened. There was no reason for a door to be hidden in the attic like this, not unless it led somewhere. David cautiously reached for the handle, his fingers trembling. He pushed it open with a slight creak. The dim light from the window barely illuminated the small, hidden space beyond it, but what he saw made his stomach drop. There, in the corner of the tiny room, was a mattress, a makeshift bed. Beside it, clothing was scattered on the floor, as though someone had hastily thrown it aside. A few personal items, an old backpack, a half-empty bottle of water, and a crumpled jacket, were abandoned near the bed. David's eyes locked on one particular item, a pair of men's shoes, well-worn and out of place in the attic. His heart skipped a beat. There was no doubt in David's mind now. Rachel's lover was living in the attic. He had been hiding there all along, tucked away in the shadows of their home, right under David's nose. The thought was surreal, impossible to grasp. How had Rachel managed to keep such a secret for so long? David stood frozen for a moment, the full weight of the discovery sinking in. He felt sick to his stomach. His hands were shaking, his breathing shallow. He had found the truth, but it didn't feel like relief. It felt like a betrayal. His world, his family, everything he thought he knew, had been turned upside down in an instant. A cold sweat ran down the back of his neck as he turned to leave the attic, his mind racing. The betrayal was more than he could bear, but there was no turning back now. The secret was out. The only question now was what he would do with it. David's footsteps were heavy as he descended from the attic. His mind was a storm of confusion, anger, and disbelief. The sight of Ethan's hidden space in the attic burned into his mind, every detail vivid and sharp. The mattress, the scattered clothes, the shoes, all evidence of secret life that had been unfolding right under his roof. As he reached the bottom of the stairs, his pulse raced, and the air in the house felt suffocating. David could hear the faint sound of running water from the bathroom. Rachel was still in the shower, oblivious to the storm that was about to break over her. He stood in the hallway for a moment, staring at the closed bathroom door, as the reality of what he had discovered settled over him. David wasn't a violent man. He had always believed in handling conflicts calmly and rationally. But in that moment, as anger surged through him, a different part of him awakened. A part that wanted revenge. A part that felt betrayed not only by his wife, but by the man who had hidden in his own house, living a double life. The rage was suffocating, but so was the sense of betrayal. He had been a good husband. He had been faithful, loyal, and loving. How could Rachel do this to him? The thought of her secret meetings, her lies, and the man who had taken his place in their home filled him with a desire to make them both feel the consequences of their actions. David didn't want to act impulsively, though. He needed to think clearly. He needed a plan, something calculated and cold, so that Rachel and Ethan would understand the gravity of their betrayal. This wasn't just about a moment of rage. It was about making sure they paid for what they had done. He knew the moment Rachel stepped out of the bathroom, everything would change. He had been patient for so long, but that patience had a limit. The confrontation had to be direct, but not violent. He wouldn't let them think he was out of control. David needed to hold onto the upper hand. Rachel emerged from the bathroom, her hair wrapped in a towel, her face glowing with the post-shower calm. She smiled at him, a smile that now seemed fake, hollow. She didn't know it yet, but her life was about to unravel in a way she couldn't have anticipated. "David?" she asked, noticing the serious look on his face. "What's wrong?" Her voice had the same softness it always did, but today it grated on David's nerves. He felt a coldness in his chest as he met her eyes. This wasn't the woman he had married. This wasn't the person he had trusted for so long. "I know," he said simply, his voice low but steady. Rachel frowned, clearly confused. "What do you mean, you know?" David took a deep breath. Try and keep the emotions at bay. "I know about the attic, Rachel. I know about you and Ethan. You think I didn't notice? You think I wouldn't find out?" Her face went pale, and she stepped back instinctively, as if trying to put distance between herself and the truth. For a moment, there was only silence between them, the weight of the situation pressing in on both of them. "I don't know what you're talking about," Rachel said, her voice shaky. "You've got it all wrong, David." David couldn't help but laugh bitterly. "Really? You're still going to lie to me after all this time? After everything? I saw him, Rachel. I saw Ethan's room in the attic. I saw the mattress, the clothes, the shoes. I know you've been hiding him there for months. I know everything." Rachel's face crumpled, and tears welled up in her eyes. She reached for him, her voice pleading. "David, please, I didn't want this to happen. Stop." David cut her off, his voice hard. "Don't even try to explain. You betrayed me. You betrayed our family. I don't care about your excuses, Rachel. You don't get to apologize your way out of this." Rachel collapsed into a chair, her hands trembling. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "It was a mistake, David. Please, I never wanted to hurt you." David shook his head, the anger still burning in his chest. "You did hurt me. You don't get to play the victim here. You made your choices, Rachel. Now you're going to deal with the consequences." David wasn't done. Not yet. His mind raced as he started to formulate the next step in his plan. He had been wronged, and now it was time to make Rachel and Ethan feel the full force of their actions. David's first thought was about Ethan. He would have to make sure Ethan faced the consequences of his betrayal as well. He couldn't let the man get away scot-free. If he was going to take this through, he had to make sure Ethan understood that actions like these came with a price. David decided to take a two-pronged approach. First, he would expose Ethan for the liar he was. Ethan worked in the same office as David, and he knew the man's colleagues well. David could use his position to get information about Ethan's personal life and then leak it to the right people. He wasn't going to go to HR directly. No, that would be too easy. Instead, David would gather the dirt and expose Ethan through subtle means, anonymous tips, social media posts, and even whispers around the office. It would be the kind of slow burn that would destroy Ethan's reputation bit by bit, until the man had no choice but to face the fallout. Next, David would focus on Rachel. His goal wasn't to hurt her physically, but emotionally. He had to make her feel the weight of the betrayal. The best way to do this was to withdraw from her entirely. No more affection, no more pretending. He would be a cold, distant shadow of the man she had once known. Every time she tried to approach him, he would pull away, making her realize that the man she had destroyed could never be the same again. He would stop talking to her about their future, about their children, and slowly but surely, he would make her understand that she had lost everything. David didn't want reconciliation. He didn't want forgiveness. What he wanted was for Rachel to feel the emptiness that he now felt every day. Finally, David knew that he had to stay strong. He couldn't let himself be manipulated by Rachel's tears or her pleas for forgiveness. He would stay calm and calculated, never showing weakness. He wouldn't let her off easy. David had always prided himself on his patience, but now his patience had a purpose. His revenge would be measured, precise, and devastating. And as he looked down at Rachel, her tear-streaked face still trying to reach out to him, he knew that she had no idea what was coming. David's resolve was unwavering. The storm inside him had calmed, but the anger remained, a quiet, constant force that guided his every move. The plans were in motion now, and each piece was falling into place with chilling precision. He wasn't interested in reconciliation. The betrayal was too deep, too far-reaching. What he wanted now was for Rachel and Ethan to feel the same emptiness he felt, to suffer the consequences of their lies. David had always been a man who preferred to keep things private, to avoid drama. But sometimes, revenge required getting your hands dirty, and David was more than willing to do whatever it took. Ethan had made a mistake by thinking he could hide in the shadows of David's home, playing a role in his family's life as if no one would notice. David would make sure the world knew exactly who Ethan really was, and what he had done. The first step was easy. David knew Ethan's work routine inside and out. They both worked at the same firm, a place where appearances were everything. Ethan, though seemingly harmless, had built a carefully crafted image of professionalism. But David knew better. Ethan wasn't the man he pretended to be. It only took a few well-placed anonymous tips to set the ball rolling. David's first move was to leak information to a few of Ethan's colleagues, anonymous emails to people he knew Ethan interacted with daily. He made sure to weave in details that would raise suspicion, whispers about Ethan's extracurricular activities, how he spent long hours on personal calls, and the strange timing of his sudden absences from the office. David even created a few fake email accounts to send documents from one of Ethan's business meetings, alluding to a series of shady financial transactions, hinting at dishonesty and deceit. The whispers started to spread quickly. It wasn't long before Ethan's colleagues began talking behind his back. David watched with a cold satisfaction as the tension around Ethan grew, his colleagues' once friendly demeanor turning into forced politeness. It wasn't obvious at first, but soon enough, people started asking questions, and the rumors gained momentum. David didn't need to do anything else. The damage was done. At the office Christmas party a week later, Ethan had barely exchanged a few words with anyone before it became clear to him that things had shifted. The usual glances of admiration he received from his peers had turned into something colder, more calculating. The gossip was thick in the air, though no one dared confront him directly. He was still a part of the group, but the subtle exclusion was painful. Ethan wasn't the fool who didn't understand. He was beginning to realize that someone had deliberately been tearing down his image bit by bit. David kept his distance, letting the office rumors burn at Ethan's heels. But there was more to it than just office gossip. It was only a matter of time before Ethan's position in the company would be questioned. The whispers would soon make their way up the corporate ladder. While Ethan was facing the initial cracks in his reputation, David turned his attention to Rachel. His plan for her was more subtle, more personal. He didn't want to destroy her career or her friends. No, he wanted something deeper, something that would break her in a way that no public scandal could. He would break her spirit, piece by piece, until she realized the extent of what she had lost. David's first step was to make sure she felt isolated. He started to withdraw completely from her. No more casual conversations, no more affectionate touches. He stopped asking about her day and stopped engaging with her when she reached out. Every time she tried to initiate a conversation, he pulled away. The house, once filled with the sound of their shared life, now felt like a cavern of silence. Rachel tried to explain herself, of course. She begged for forgiveness, tried to reconcile, but David refused. He didn't give her a chance to speak, and each time she spoke, he would shut her down, not with anger, but with cold indifference. He would look at her without emotion, as if she were a stranger. It hurt her, but David knew that's exactly what she needed to feel, the consequences of her betrayal. David's next move was to subtly sabotage her friendships. He had been quietly reaching out to some of Rachel's closest friends, gently planting seeds of doubt about her integrity. He told them about how distant Rachel had been lately, about how they were struggling in their marriage, but he always framed it as a cry for help. He made sure to emphasize how Rachel was emotionally unstable, even going so far as to mention how she had been texting Ethan when they were supposed to be spending time together. David didn't directly accuse her of infidelity, but the suggestion was enough to make her friends wonder. Slowly, Rachel's social circle began to shrink. Invitations became fewer. Phone calls went unanswered. Her isolation deepened. Rachel's desperation grew. She turned to David, asking if they could go to counseling, pleading for them to work through their issues. But David would always respond with sharp, cold, "Why bother? You made your choice." The rejection was complete, and though Rachel's tears came in flood, David stood firm, resolute in his decision. She had made her bed, and now it was time for her to lie in it. Then there was a house. David had been paying close attention to the financial side of things. The house had been in both their names, but David had quietly made the necessary steps to remove her from a mortgage without her knowledge. He wasn't going to kick her out immediately, but he would make sure she knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that she no longer had a claim to the life they had built together. The house, once their shared sanctuary, was now a prison for her, a place where she would realize that David was the one holding the keys. Ethan, meanwhile, was on the brink. The gossip in the office had escalated to rumors of misconduct, leading to a formal investigation into his actions. Though no one could pinpoint the exact cause of the whispers, everyone knew something wasn't right. Ethan's professional life was slowly unraveling. His position within the company was being questioned, and he knew that the scandal would eventually catch up to him. David had been watching all of this unfold with cold detachment. He knew exactly when to make his final move. He had arranged for an anonymous tip-off to be sent to the company's HR department, detailing Ethan's affair with a married colleague, his wife. It wasn't just a rumor now. It was a formal accusation. The tip-off included evidence of Ethan's inappropriate behavior, subtle hints at financial misdeeds, and insinuations of misconduct within the company. It was enough to trigger an official investigation. Ethan's career, once so carefully built, was now in jeopardy. His reputation had been destroyed, and he had nowhere to turn. The public humiliation was unbearable. Rachel, too, would feel the final blow when she discovered that the house had been put into David's sole name. The realization that she had lost everything, her friends, her marriage, her home, hit her like a tidal wave. She had no idea how to get out of the situation, no way to make it right. The man she had betrayed had taken everything from her, and she was left with nothing but the shards of a shattered life. David stood at the edge of his revenge, watching as Rachel and Ethan crumbled under the weight of their own actions. He felt a strange sense of closure. No joy, no satisfaction, just an eerie calm. He had planned and executed his revenge with precision, but the cost was clear. The man he had been was gone. There was nothing left but the cold, calculated figure who had taken control of his own fate. The day had finally come. The pieces of David's revenge were in place, each one falling into its intended spot like the last pieces of a carefully crafted puzzle. Ethan was on the verge of losing everything: his career, his dignity, his reputation. Rachel, too, had begun to realize the full extent of her betrayal. The house was now in David's name alone. Her friends had turned their backs on her, and her marriage had been reduced to nothing more than an emotional wasteland. David had kept his distance, letting the slow erosion of their lives unfold with icy detachment. But today was different. Today, everything would come to a head. He had already pushed them to the brink. Now, he would give them the final confrontation, the one they hadn't seen coming, the one that would change everything. Rachel was at the kitchen table when David walked in, her hands clasped in front of her, her face pale. She had been crying for days, but today there was something different in her eyes. She knew what was coming. She knew this was a moment where everything would either crumble or somehow, miraculously, come back together. David's eyes met hers, and for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to feel something. It wasn't anger or hatred or even sadness. It was a cold, final sense of resolution. The game was over. "You knew this was coming," David said quietly, his voice devoid of emotion. Rachel opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. She just looked at him, lost. She had tried so hard to reach him, to fix things, but it was too late. The cracks in their relationship had deepened beyond repair, and now there was nothing left but the consequences of her actions. "I did everything for you, Rachel," David continued, his tone sharp. "I gave you my trust, my love, and you threw it all away. You let him into our home. You let him into our lives. And for what? A few stolen moments of pleasure." Rachel's tears were silent now, her face etched with the weight of her guilt. She tried to speak, but her voice caught in her throat. She couldn't defend herself. Not anymore. The truth was out. She had betrayed him in ways that words couldn't fix. David took a step forward, his presence commanding, unyielding. "You think you can just apologize and it'll all go back to normal? That I'll forget what you did? What he did?" He paused, the final piece of his revenge now in motion. "Ethan's been removed from the office, Rachel. His career's over. Your life, your world, it's all falling apart, and I'm the one who made sure of it." Rachel's eyes widened with shock, her breath catching. She had no idea. She had been so lost in her own world of regret and guilt that she hadn't realized the full extent of David's actions. Ethan, the man she had chosen over him, the man she had betrayed him with, was now facing the consequences of his own lies. "David, please," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Please, don't do this. We can fix this. We can still—" "No," David interjected, his voice cold. "You made your choice. You chose him. You chose betrayal. And now you have to live with the consequences." Rachel collapsed into her chair, her sobs breaking the silence that had filled the room. She looked at him, a mixture of desperation and regret, but David felt nothing. There was no sorrow left in him, no room for forgiveness. All that remained was a quiet satisfaction of knowing that everything he had set in motion had come to fruition. The finality of the moment hung in the air like a dense fog. David didn't speak again. He didn't need to. The truth had already been laid bare between them, and the damage was done. Rachel's tears were nothing but a hollow reminder of what had been lost. The trust, the love, the family, they were gone, and no amount of crying or pleading could bring them back. David turned and walked toward the door. "This is over," he said without turning around. "You and Ethan can live your lives in the ashes of your choices. I've moved on." As he stepped out of the house, he felt the weight of the years, the weight of the love he had once felt, lifting off of him. The revenge was complete, and in that moment, David felt something he hadn't in a long time: peace. It wasn't joy, and it wasn't victory. It was the peace that came from knowing he had taken control of his own destiny. And as the door shut behind him, he knew that everything had changed. The silence that filled the house after David left was suffocating. Rachel sat motionless at the kitchen table, her hands shaking in her lap. Her tears had long since stopped, replaced by a hollow emptiness that seemed to swallow her whole. The reality of what had happened was now inescapable. Her marriage was over, her life shattered. She had no one left to blame but herself. David's departure wasn't a dramatic exit, but a quiet one. It was in his indifference, his cold finality, that the deepest sting lay. He had given her every chance, every opportunity to turn things around, but she had failed him again and again. There was no room left for forgiveness. She could feel the weight of his absence, like a void that nothing could fill. Outside, the world continued as it always had. Unaware of the storm that had torn through Rachel's life, she thought about Ethan, the man who had once made her feel special, but now seemed like nothing more than a ghost. She didn't know where he was, what he was doing, or if he even cared anymore. All she knew was that he, too, was gone, his career in tatters, his reputation destroyed. He had been her escape, her fleeting moment of excitement. But now he was a casualty of her own mistakes. Days passed, and the house felt more and more like a prison. Rachel couldn't sleep. She couldn't eat. She couldn't find the strength to move forward, not without the man who had once been the love of her life. Every corner of their home reminded her of what she had lost, what she had thrown away. The photos on the walls, the memories of happier times, were now just painful reminders of a life she could never have again. David's revenge had not only taken away her marriage and her family, it had taken away her sense of self. She was no longer the woman she had once been, the woman who believed she could fix anything. The lies, the deceit, the affair, they had all consumed her, leaving her with nothing but regret. As for David, his path was clear. He didn't need to hold onto the past any longer. His revenge had been complete, but his future was waiting. It was a future that no longer included Rachel, and in that finality, he found peace. Both their lives had been irreparably changed, but in the end, it was David who walked away, unburdened, while Rachel remained, struggling to rebuild the pieces of her broken life. As time passed, the echoes of that final confrontation between David and Rachel began to fade, but the scars remained etched deep in the fabric of their lives. The world outside kept turning, indifferent to the unraveling of two people's existence, but within the confines of the house that had once been filled with laughter, love, and warmth, there was only silence. For Rachel, the days that followed David's departure were a blur of confusion, regret, and isolation. The pain of losing him, the man she had once promised everything to, was a wound that refused to heal. She tried to pick up the pieces of her shattered life, but each attempt felt futile. There was no easy way to undo what had been done. The affair with Ethan, the lies, the betrayal, all of it weighed on her like a heavy chain, dragging her further into despair. She found herself unable to face her former friends, too ashamed to even answer their calls. The distance between her and the world around her grew, and though she tried to move on, to rebuild, there was no escaping the fact that the person she had been confident, assured, and loved was gone. In her place was a hollow version of herself, one that was defined only by the mistakes she had made. Rachel's attempt at finding comfort in her career, or even in fleeting relationships, felt empty. She couldn't escape the truth that her marriage had been the one thing that had given her life meaning. David had been her anchor, her foundation, and now that was gone. And with it, so was a part of her soul. But as the months dragged on, something shifted in Rachel. It wasn't a sudden moment of clarity, but rather a slow, painful process of self-realization. She had lost everything. Yes, but she still had the power to rebuild, even if it was from the very bottom. Her journey would never be easy, and the consequences of her betrayal would forever be with her. But perhaps, just perhaps, this was the beginning of a new chapter, a chapter where she learned to live with the consequences of her actions and began to heal. For David, the resolution of his revenge had not brought the peace he had expected. He had taken control, dismantled the life that had been shattered by Rachel's infidelity. And yet, the feeling of victory was empty. It wasn't that he regretted his actions. They had been carefully calculated, deliberate, and in many ways justified. It was simply that revenge, no matter how meticulously planned, could never truly fill the void left by love's destruction. David continued to move forward, his career flourishing, his social life thriving. But in the quiet moments, when he was alone with his thoughts, he would sometimes find himself wondering what could have been. Could there have been a way to save his marriage? Could he have forgiven Rachel? The questions lingered, unspoken, unanswered. In the end, What remained for both of them was not the satisfaction of revenge or the joy of victory, but a deep understanding that once something so fundamental as trust is broken, it cannot easily be repaired. The love that had once existed between David and Rachel was irreparably changed, like a beautiful painting torn apart and pieced back together, its edges jagged and raw. David had learned the bitter truth that betrayal leaves no room for healing, no matter how much time passes. Rachel, too, learned that there is no escape from the choices we make. Her actions had carved a permanent mark on her soul, a reminder of the fragility of love, trust, and the lives we build with those we care for. In the end, both David and Rachel were left to navigate their own paths forward, alone, but changed forever. The cost of betrayal had been high, and neither of them would ever be the same. The finality of it all left a somber truth hanging in the air. Some wounds never heal, and some losses can never be undone.